Today I'll be discussing, and ranking, the 5 versions of Nosferatu. Okay, 4.5. Yes, spoilers for all. What are the contenders? And what is Nosferatu? Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, is a 1922 low-budget German expressionist and German romanticist silent horror fairy tale film intended as an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It was the baby of Albin Grau, head of a hermetic lodge and co-owner of the newly created esoteric studio Prana Films. He would act as producer, art and costume designer, storyboardist, poster artist, and anything else that needed to be done. He hired another occultist, Henrik Galeen, to pen the screenplay, with the instruction that it was Dracula, but now make it not Dracula. Perhaps because they didn't have the rights, which they didn't, but there's no evidence Grau took that into consideration. But certainly because he wanted it to fit German culture and German audiences. Since it was no longer going to be Dracula, a new title was needed, which they took from the word that novelist Bram Stoker mistakenly thought meant something close to vampire, though it's generally agreed upon now that Nosferatu wasn't a word, but was a misheard and misrecorded version of one of any of a number of similar-sounding words in Eastern European languages, or Greek, meaning anything from disease carrier to offensive one, unbreathing, enemy, just not vampire. Grau then hired up-and-coming director F.W. Murnau. Not an occultist, but they all had in common their trauma from World War I and the pandemic that came with it. Murnau added the subtitle, A Symphony of Horror. While the film wasn't now Dracula, Grau and others name-dropped Dracula too often, which got back to Stoker's widow, who was hardly rolling in dough. She sued for copyright infringement and won. The new owners, Grau and Company sold the film and declared bankruptcy, couldn't pay her. So she requested all copies of the film to be destroyed. As we're still able to watch it, you can see that the order was not carried out effectively. But in the US, the novel Dracula had never been copyrighted, so here the film status was unclear. With that lack of clarity everywhere, and no one doing anything about it, Nosferatu has been treated as if in the public domain for 70 years, more in some places. Thus, the many releases of gray, grainy, scratchy versions. Things have improved massively of late, with 2 major restorations. Nosferatu has never looked better since 1922. A note on the music. A score for the premiere was solicited from composer Hans Erdmann, who'd never done a film score before. That score is lost, though he published a suite in 1926 made up of pieces from the score, around 40 minutes of music. And that suite has been used as the basis for a reconstruction that is on a majority of the restored DVDs and Blu-rays currently available, and almost always incorrectly claimed to be Erdmann's original score. The other most widely available score, on restored versions, is by James Bernard, composer for multiple Hammer films, including Curse of Frankenstein and Horror of Dracula. This is generally taken to be the best score, and I lean that way. There are tons of unofficial scores. Some good, many interesting, and most written to fit the public domain version, which is missing a few frames and often runs at the wrong speed. Now I hear, over and over, that Nosferatu is Dracula. But is it? If we make it vague enough, and only talk about small sections, then Nosferatu and Dracula do seem identical. Stated vaguely, it's about a man who travels to the Carpathian Mountains to aid in the sale of a home to a wealthy and eccentric aristocrat. Once there, he finds the buyer to be a literal monster. He eventually escapes the castle, returning home much the worse for wear. The monster travels by ship to his new home, causing the deaths of all on board. He then focuses on the man's wife. That sounds the same to the first quarter of the book and first half of the film, but if we get more specific, most everything's different. Location, date, themes, all the characters are different. None match in personality, and only a few in purpose. Thomas Hutter is the replacement for Jonathan Harker, in that they both are property agents, though Harker is a solicitor. Beyond that, they have no connection. I've always found Harker dull, but he is the sort that can take action and stab a vampire. Hutter, not so much. He's kind of a man-child ass, with an interest in his future financial success, but otherwise non-active. He does pretty much nothing of his own volition, and absolutely nothing in the last half of the film. Harker is also of the British gentry. Not moneyed himself, but his crowd is. So a stiff upper lip, preserve the empire type. Hutter is a lower middle-class German resident of a village. Hutter's wife is Ellen, our Mina replacement, with no attributes of Mina. She and Hutter have been married for a year and show absolutely no sexual interest in each other, or any understanding. Mina starts as Harker's fiancée, and unlike Mina, Ellen is so fragile I'd expect a swift breeze to tear her apart. She's very new agey, love all nature, and while continuously fretting, she is able to take action when she finds it necessary. As for the book's Lucy, she doesn't exist in the film, which means those courting her, Seward, Morris, and Homewood, also don't exist. Although there is a doctor in the film with perhaps a minute of screen time, hardly Seward. And missing along with them is Van Helsing. The film briefly mentions an alchemist, Professor Bulwer, but he barely exists and has no effect on the story. All of these characters are replaced by Harding, a shipowner and friend of Hutter, and his sister, who has so little to do that I didn't realize for years that she was Harding's sister. Then there's Knock, who stands in for Renfield, as both are insane and worship the vampire. But Renfield is just some guy at the asylum. Knock is Hutter's boss, who it's implied is involved in the occult and has been communicating with Orlok in a secret magical language. Which brings us to the vampire himself, and simply put, Orlok is not Dracula. Dracula has 3 brides, no reflection, can change into a bat, mist, and wolf, and is repelled by garlic and Christian symbols. Orlok has none of that. Dracula appears as an off-putting man. He can pass for human. Orlok looks like a cross between a goblin and a rat. He is clearly a supernatural entity. His main trait is that he is a plague bringer, not an attribute of Dracula. Most of the deaths Orlok causes, and there are many, are due to disease, nor is there any indication that his bite or blood would cause anyone else to become what he is. As far as the film is concerned, he's it. Like modern vampires, sunlight, or at least the coming of the dawn, destroys him. But this isn't a feature of Dracula, who in the book just avoids the day. Yeah, this is where the trope of sunlight killing a vampire comes from. Once we get back to the village, nothing matches. There is no detective work, no attempt to counter the vampire's deeds, and no hunt for the monster, i.e. none of the last 3/4 of the book. There's no group of heroes that get together to do anything. Instead, the last third of the film is mostly about the ravages of the plague and how the citizens react. Ellen is the only one who knows that a vampire is around. Hutter knows, but he's repressing it. So it is left to Ellen, on her own, to defeat Orlok, not in a battle or with knives, but by giving herself to him, and thus causing him to forget the coming of the dawn. Yeah, it's sex. She kills him with sex. So is Nosferatu plagiarized from Dracula? Maybe. But whatever it is, Nosferatu has had an incalculable effect upon horror cinema. But it didn't see any direct sequels or remakes for many years. Hollywood preferred a closer connection to the stage play that was based on the novel Dracula. It wasn't until 1979 that Werner Herzog's remake was released. Well, 2 remakes, kinda. Nosferatu, Phantom der Nacht, and Nosferatu the Vampire. Made with a crew of 16 and a budget 1/10 of the Universal Dracula of that same year. Herzog's motivation was less about having a new way to tell the story or wanting his own take on it, as it was about connecting the fractured pieces of German cinema.
It establishes some sort of a link between the great expressionist cinema that we had in Germany and our film renaissance now. It is a film that is beyond my own private person. I think it is necessary, since we are a fatherless generation, to have some sort of a continuity in film history.
The Third Reich had destroyed a generation of film and filmmakers. As he saw it, he had no cinematic fathers, so he had to go back in time, back to Murnau, to his cinematic grandfather, to forge a complete German cinema. That meant he was going to be faithful, very faithful. Not a shot-for-shot remake, not quite, but close. He'd bring sound and color, but otherwise walk softly on Murnau's work. And he'd revert to Bram Stoker's names, which I find distracting. So Orlok is Dracula, Hutter is Harker, and Ellen is Lucy for some reason, not Mina. This Lucy is stronger, less fragile, and more assertive. There's only 3 added scenes of significance. Dracula chatting with Lucy about his loneliness, Lucy going out into the town and seeing the dying townspeople, and an epilogue, with Harker turning into a vampire to continue the plague. Outside of those, I could imagine him using the original film as storyboards. The making of these versions is infamous for multiple reasons. Herzog had a tumultuous relationship with famously difficult Klaus Kinski over 5 films that they made together, involving physical assaults and gunshots. For Nosferatu, Herzog continued his approach to directing Kinski, which was excessively repeating scenes or aggravating him till he threw a fit, making Kinski too exhausted to misbehave or overact. And that's what he'd film. The movie also has the worst animal abuse record of any film I've heard of since the 30s, with rats literally being boiled alive. The horses and other animals were mistreated as well. Kinski would go on to appear in a sequel of sorts, Vampire in Venice, where he'd refused to wear the Orlok makeup after he was hired. Herzog had no involvement with that film, and I'm not counting that as one of the 5 Nosferatu films. No, Herzog made 2 adaptations simultaneously, a German and an English version. And the difference isn't just dubbing, though there was dubbing. He uses the same non-dialogue scenes for both, but the dialogue scenes were reshot, giving us different performances and different angles, though that doesn't mean he uses the sound in either case. Even in the German version, he dubbed multiple actors who weren't German and so were too accented. In the English version, he dubbed a whole lot more. But again, these were reshot, with the mouths moving to English words. I'd assume that was the only difference, but a close examination shows that there's very minor editing changes in half the scenes, even when no dialogue is involved. Often just a second more or less here and there. I've never heard an explanation for that. Why do the extra work? I do consider them different films, as does Herzog. The 4th version came out in 2023, though it had been in production for a decade. Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. In the early 2000s, for a brief time it seemed that green screen, or blue screen, might be used in an additional way. Instead of trying to fake reality, a new type of film would appear, one that didn't hide the green screen and embraced its artificiality. It could be a perfect format for fairy tales and horror, something between normal films and stage performances, radio plays, comic books, and just telling stories around a fire. I saw quite a few low-budget attempts at this, and a few bigger budget films were made, most notably Sin City and Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow. But mostly it died out, and green screen work is now intended to go unnoticed. This Nosferatu was one of the ones that embraced the artificiality. I came across director David Lee Fisher's 2005 The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari on the festival circuit. His idea was to take the original film and insert his actors and sound. He'd refer to this as a remix instead of a remake. It was certainly an interesting idea, and I recall it going over very well at the screening, though it has been many years now, so I don't recall enough to review it. But I had a good time, and Caligari is the perfect choice for such a project, as nothing is supposed to look real. Fisher then decided to try the same thing with Nosferatu, acting as writer, director, and editor. Once again, the original was used as the background of scenes, but not to the same degree. More often, the backdrops look much like the original, but weren't taken from the film. By its very nature, this was pointed toward being a shot-for-shot remake, but there are a few changes. Hutter now takes a train across country rather than a horse. I suspect because it's easier not to have a horse in front of a green screen. But the biggest changes, still small, attempt to give Hutter an arc and to give others, mainly his friends, some substance. Hutter learns from his encounters and realizes his priorities have been skewed. Harding is given more screen time, and his sister actually has a personality for a change. A mystic who hits on Ellen. The magical connection between Orlok and Nock is made more literal. And for such a small indie project, the film boasts a star, Doug Jones, as Count Orlok. And if you don't know who Jones is, yes you do. You just don't know it. Jones is known for his ability to express character while buried under latex. Hellboy, Pan's Labyrinth, Rise of the Silver Surfer, The Shape of Water, Star Trek Discovery, and many more. He'd also been in Caligari. Unfortunately, I didn't see this at a festival, but at home. And a year later came the final entry, the only one with a significant budget, Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. On the scale of remakes, this is still a faithful version, but the least faithful. Eggers stating his version is German Romanticism, not Expressionism. At a half hour, or more, longer than the others, it adds a good deal, mainly to character, less to plot, in some cases expanding on what was done in the previous remakes. And it actually removes a little. The plague-bearer notion is downplayed. Orlok still brings disease, but it isn't an essential part of his character, and how the city is represented is given little focus. All of the import is now on how events affect the main characters. Magic plays an even bigger role, with Nock using a summoning circle, but more with Ellen, who is now magical by nature, and is she, as a lonely and abused youth who awoke the vampire by calling out for someone. And she no longer just faints and sleepwalks, but has convulsions that wouldn't look out of place in The Exorcist. So Orlok is no longer moving to the town to find life, but purely to consummate a relationship with Ellen. He also no longer looks like Orlok. Instead, he looks mostly like the novel's description of Dracula. Tall, mustachioed, off-putting, just with a bit more decay. Harding, whose role has increased much more, now lives not with his sister, but with his wife and 2 children. That wife having a Lucy Mina kind of relationship with Ellen. And for the first time, we have a real Van Helsing analog in Professor von Franz. Between the additions of mysterious deaths to investigate in a friend's house, Seaver's part expanded to him now being a Seward analog, the band of heroes assembling under von Franz to hunt the vampire, and the reduction of the plague theme, this is looking very much like the Dracula stage play, which was the foundation for Lugosi's Dracula. Finally, Nosferatu has always been metaphorically about sex, sexual desire, sexual repression, sexual power. Here Eggers makes it text. That need is what awoke Orlok. Repression is what keeps the door open, and the power is what defeats the monster. All visible on screen. This is a horny Nosferatu. So that's our 5. What do I think of them? Starting at the least of them, 1979's Nosferatu the Vampire. I find no reason for anyone to watch this, and I don't know that Herzog would disagree. He said the German language version was the culturally authentic one. I do understand those who dislike subtitles, but here the cost is too high to avoid them. The performances are worse in English, sometimes just bad. Why? I've most often heard the suggestion that, for the actors, German was their first language, or at least more primary than English, and while they were all fluent in English, there's a difference between just saying the words for dubbing and having to act in front of the camera in a foreign language. Maybe? But let me suggest that attitude could have played a larger part. Did any of them think their English performances were as important as their German ones? Herzog didn't. The studio wanted English, not him. And that's going to be an issue.
I wish I could partake of the love which is between you and Jonathan.
Nothing in this world, not even God, can touch that.
There are other issues with this version, but that's enough to secure the bottom spot, since 4th place goes to 1979's Nosferatu Phantom der Nacht. Yes, the German version is a big step up, but there's still notable issues, and those arise from the concept. I'm sympathetic to why Herzog wanted to make this film, but paying homage to one's forebears and trying to connect with them is not the same as having an interesting take on the material. In fact, it's the opposite. This isn't Herzog's Nosferatu. This is Murnau's, but with a bit of Herzog uncomfortably latched on. That near shot-for-shot is a real problem, more so than with the likes of unnecessary productions like the remake of Psycho, because you can't just reshoot a silent film as a talkie. The form changes how you need to tell the story. Silent films, by their nature, are an additional step away from reality. Sure, silent films can be made more real, but the default is more of illusion. It also asks more of the audience to fill in the pieces with their imagination. This makes silent cinema an excellent format for a fairy tale, and Nosferatu is a dark fairy tale. It's more kin to the Brothers Grimm than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now you can do things in sound films to create that separation, to enhance the fantasy, how you shoot, how you light. Think Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things, or anything from Wes Anderson. But Herzog doesn't do anything like that. He's not an expressionist, and only partly a romanticist, so he reshot Murnau's scenes mostly as a realist. He shot it the same way you'd shoot a drawing room drama, or more, a documentary about a little German town. It's really surprising how little he does with the camera, and the lighting is flat. So the mystery is gone. The horror is gone. I saw this with an audience, and when we reached the last scene of Harker turning into a vampire, people laughed. And rightly so. It looks goofy. In silent, it might have worked. I've heard critics who like this film admitting with gusto that yes, it isn't a horror film, but an existential art piece. No, because it's built on a horror film. Though it could have been, if Herzog had worried less about faithfulness and more about what he had to say. It's easy to see how it went wrong by looking at where it went right. One of Herzog's added scenes has Ellen going out into the rat-filled, plague-infested streets and finding people partying and engaging in a Last Supper, and the whole thing is brilliant. Surreal. It looks good, best camera work in the film. It's meaningful, and it's new. This is the movie that Herzog should have made. This is our step away from reality. I don't think it's coincidental that that scene plays out mostly as a silent. I'll also add that I'm not thrilled with the performances. Yes, they are superior to those in the English version, but they're too subdued. The dubbing doesn't help. In either version, the dubbing really doesn't help. And exhausting your star is not how you get a great performance. It is how you get a leisurely pace. The exception is with Knock, where Alexander Granich plays it with the exuberance of the silent. Meaning in a vacuum, I like it, but it doesn't fit with anyone else. One more thing. Most films have some errors, but boy, this one, make that these ones, have a lot. Television antennas on the buildings, in more than one scene. After spending a minute pointing out that Orlok doesn't have a reflection, then Orlok's face appearing in the mirror, in the German version only, I suppose to make up for the English version having Jonathan's coat vanish. Modern electrical switches and lights. I saw cars parked in the background on the big screen, but the home video doesn't have the resolution to show that. Normally, I don't worry much about an error or two, but the pace left me with enough free time to notice these. Well, it gets better from here. In third place, it's Fisher's 2023 Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. I'm not sure anyone needs a shot-for-shot, or close to that, sound remake of a silent film, but if you're going to do it, this is the way that works. Embracing the artificiality keeps us on the same plane as a silent film, giving that storybook feeling. Doug Jones said, "Every movement and gesture had to align perfectly with the original imagery. It's an ethereal, dreamlike experience that honors the past while expanding on it." And yeah, I get that. With the layers of artificiality, the dialogue didn't take me away from the film, but pulled me closer, more so with the sound effects. And Jones, unsurprisingly, makes an excellent Orlok. He said this was the creature that he most wanted to play, and it shows, particularly in that honors the past bit. This Orlok matches the original. As for what doesn't match, the changes, generally, they work well enough. Conceptually, this is the best Hutter. He takes action, I understand him, there is real growth. And likewise, Harding is used at his best here, with grief pulling him back into the story and properly tying up a loose end with Knock. Execution-wise, the budget is going to show. And there's a question whether either Hutter or Harding need to be more than they were in the original. But all of the writers and directors of the remakes have thought so. So, if he needs to be explained and expanded, then it's done well here. I really don't think there needed to be more of Ruth, Harding's sister. But Eggers thought she needed to be expanded even more in the 2024 version, so okay, more it is. And for the added magic, the crimson blood in the monochrome frame is quite effective, as is the glowing letters. Some of the performances are a bit rough, and here and there I think the dialogue could have been punched up, but this version offers a counter to those sorts of issues. It's 92 minutes long, approximately the same length as the original. If I didn't like some of the acting, we were past it quickly enough. I suspect at over 2 hours, like Eggers's, this would have worn out its welcome. Or at just shy of an hour and 50 minutes, like Herzog's, some of the acting would have gotten on my nerves. But at 92 minutes, it does what it wants to do, and then is gone. I have to appreciate that. Some people are simply not going to like the look of it. Some people don't like the look of a Wes Anderson film. If so, pass on it, and on to the next. Which is, in second place, Robert Eggers's 2024 Nosferatu. And here we have a filmmaker who made it his own. Yes, it follows the frame of Murnau's movie, but Eggers made these characters and created this world. It's inspired by the original, and by Dracula, but this is Eggers' film. He had his own points to make, has his own style he wanted to use, his own vision if I must use the term. More than any of the others, this has a reason to exist. Eggers finds multiple ways to bring back the fantasy, the unreality of the world. Colors and tints, speed changes, but the most interesting is his limiting of movement, giving the feeling that the only part of the world that exists at any moment is what's in front of you. It's a film with a proscenium arch. When someone is undergoing an emotional moment, they approach the center of the screen and stand. Discussions are almost always carried out in 2 shots, not the ubiquitous shot-reverse shot. It's blocking I'd expect for the stage, but with settings more complex than any stage could manage. It screams out, verisimilitude yes, reality no. And beyond looking fantastical, the film looks beautiful. Yeah, money counts, and that's fine when you can see it on screen, and you can. The filtered night scenes are particularly effective. The more direct handling of sexuality is another way the film earns its existence. It isn't something that the original could or would have done, and since we've had the suggestions, taking it to the surface gives us something new for a Nosferatu film. I mentioned the 2023 Hutter as conceptually the best. This is the best practically. He doesn't have as much of an arc as that one, but he's got an arc, becoming stronger, more active, and learns to understand his wife, partly. He faces trials and overcomes them, by and large, and is easily the most likable character. The only time that's true in any version of Nosferatu, or of Dracula. That's not to take anything away from Ellen, who, if not the nicest version of the character, is the most complex. There's a lot going on with this Ellen. Sexual desire, repression, anger, lots of anger, fear, loneliness, and the acceptance of her power. I do miss the focus on the plague and the themes connected to it, but that's not a flaw of this movie. That's just what I like. That's what the other versions are about. Eggers chose different themes. This film may not be more complex in plot, but is much more so in character, so there's a lot to dig into. With so much positive, why isn't it number one? Much of that is due to the quality of the number one film, but there's also a few weaknesses here. Eggers' thing is to put fantastical occult material into accurate historical settings. It's a tricky balance. Fantasy and accuracy don't get along by default. And here, as much as I applauded his steps away from reality, he could have stepped further. The film could have used a bit less of his persnickety attention to the real world and a bit more to facade. Hutter reaching the carriage was perfect. There needed to be a lot more of that in the rest of the film. Eggers said his film wasn't expressionistic. Okay, but I think it should have been. And then there's the length. With an added 40 minutes, I want 40 minutes more material, but it's not here. More, yes, but not enough more. There's filler. A chunk of that added time is given to von Franz and the heroic vampire hunters. But he, and they, don't affect the story. I enjoy Willem Dafoe, but there is no point in von Franz being in the film. He fails to be Van Helsing, just an echo of him. He's simply an exposition machine, but we know all the exposition. He's explaining not to us, but to in-world characters, and what he says changes nothing. I thought at least he'd be the source of the method to kill the vampire, but no, Ellen just knows it. Ellen doesn't need him to accept herself. If he was going to be added to the film, he should be doing something. Harding's contemptuous laugh at von Franz for being useless feels like a fourth wall break, a meta-commentary on the script. There's not enough to justify 2 hours and 12 minutes. 2 hours 16 in the extended cut. Either there needed to be more reason for the time spent with the side characters, or around 15 minutes sliced out. As the expression goes, sometimes you've got to kill your babies. Eggers didn't. Meaning, in first place, it's 1922's Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. That's hardly a surprise. It's always a plus to be first, even more so when you know exactly what your film is saying and how it should say it. The remakes are either saying the same thing, which has already been done extremely well, or they are saying something else, which is grafting a new message, new themes, new ideas, onto a form not originally made for that. Sure, it can work, but that's a lot of extra piping that all has to flow. When the original has huge gaping flaws, that gives a remake something to do. But Nosferatu 1922 doesn't. It's shot well. In fact, it has some of the most iconic shots in the history of film. You can't beat Orlok entering Hunter's room, the ship, or the shadows sliding up the stairs. You can try and get something close, but still less, or you can do something else which isn't going to be as good. Nosferatu is also written and edited well. No fluff, no unnecessary characters or moments, no holes, no cheap jump scares, no confusion. You want to know what it felt like for war and plague to ravage your country? Here you are. It's all there in front of you. I love the precision of this movie. We're introduced to Hutter gazing into a mirror, so happy with what he sees. Separately, we meet Ellen, in tune with nature. Hutter rushes out to do what he thinks is a nice gesture for Ellen, not knowing, or caring, that she wouldn't appreciate it. And in under 2 minutes, we know all we need to know about them. Yes, later filmmakers can add sound and color, and I'm happy someone did, but the best they can do is approach the original in a somewhat altered form. This is a film that can get under your skin more than most horror, and far more than its remakes. I like Roger Ebert's statement in the film. It doesn't scare us, but it haunts us. And that's Nosferatu, 5 times over. Please like and subscribe, as it'll help me a lot. And I'll return with more on classic and genre film.